everyone, and welcome to our conversation on the nitrogen cycle. One of the most interesting cycles, in my opinion, just because there's so much to it. And what you didn't know was that it's all done by bacteria, which I find extremely cool. So, here we have the nitrogen cycle. Again, make sure that you've watched the video on the nitrogen cycle and put it in your notes. It will help immensely as I talk through this quick picture here. So, like carbon, oxygen, water, and sulfur, nitrogen can be found in the lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere. So in air, water, and land. All right. Interesting thing is that in order for it to be on land and in the water, it needs to have some sort of biotic community, so bacteria, that will allow for it to convert into usable forms. We can't just use nitrogen from the air, breathe it in. There's nitrogen. No, it doesn't work. We have to make sure that nitrogen is converted into the usable form of nitrate. So in the ground, let me start this again. In the atmosphere, we have atmospheric nitrogen or N2 gas. And there's a couple ways that we can get it into usable form. One is through a process called nitrification, which is essentially when lightning strikes. Super cool, hey? So when you have a lightning storm, as it passes through the atmosphere, as that lightning comes towards Earth, it's actually fixing the nitrogen from the atmosphere straight into nitrates in the ground for us to use. Pretty cool. The other way, though, is a little bit slower, but it's still part of the fast cycle because it's being released into the ground and back out again. It's not staying there for a long period of time. So what happens is nitrogen, okay, gets pulled into the ground by plants, which have bacteria on the nodules, which convert it from ammonia to nitrite to nitrates. And then the plants use it, they die, then it goes again and again and again. And then there's times where we can release it back out into the atmosphere. So that's this cycle right here. Okay, this is part of the fast cycle. Using it for plants, animals eat the plants, we eat the animals, boom, we have nitrogen. Okay, over here, similar thing. Okay, you have the fixing of your nitrogen using something called cyanobacteria. It takes it, it moves it into the nitrates for the phytoplankton to use, which the fish eat, which then decompose, creating ammonia and so forth, putting it back out into the atmosphere. So these two cyclical cycles inside here are both part of the fast cycle. Right here, cyanobacteria to ammonia to O, sedimentation. When you see sedimentation, we're creating some sort of rock. That means it's going to be part of the slow cycle. You'll notice here that human activities is also listed as an impact because you have to remember we release a lot of nitrogen when we burn things in the factories, when we burn anything in factories, or when we use fertilizers because nitrates are found in fertilizers. Okay, and we're going to get into that a little bit more here shortly. So nitrogen gas makes up at about 78.1% of our atmosphere. Most people think it's oxygen, but actually it's not. Nitrogen is the biggest player, okay? It's a massive part of our proteins. The nitrogenous bases found inside of DNA is also super important. So the genetic material, DNA, okay? There's bases, A, C's, T's, and G's that literally pair together that make up your entire genetic code. In proteins, okay, we have nitrogens holding together different areas to create proteins. Proteins make up mostly our body. It's what makes your eyes color, your hair color, your skin, your body's made out of proteins. So without nitrogen, it wouldn't work. Again, genetic material, without that, you wouldn't exist. So nitrogen is really important. However, we can't just take the atmospheric nitrogen and go, ooh, yay, nitrogen, here we go. We need to convert it. And so that's where the rhizobium bacteria in nodules of plants becomes so important. And we call that process nitrogen fixation. Essentially, we're taking nitrogen gas and making ammonia. So we say we're fixing the nitrogen, we're changing the nitrogen. Problem is ammonium is really bad. We can't use it. It's toxic. We learned that in the excretory system. We learned our liver literally has to take any type of nitrogenous waste, ammoniums, and make it into a urea immediately. Otherwise, we could get really sick. The plants understand this and know that ammonium is actually not very good. So what it does is it has to fix it in a process called ammonification. So the ammonium is also produced when decomposers break down organic matter. We call that process ammonification. So what we have to do is we have to convert it and convert it to get rid of this ammonia. Okay, so we move from nitrite to nitrate. Now, nitrate, guys, is the one that's really important. This is our usable nitrogen. So what we're having here is a process called nitrogen fixation, making sure that we are taking the atmospheric nitrogen and putting it into ammonium. But again, we cannot use ammonium. So what ends up happening is the bacteria do a little job again, and it's called nitrifying bacteria, and it goes through the process of nitrification. And nitrification then makes our nitrates. Thing is we don't always just want nitrogen in the ground, we want it also in the atmosphere. So there has to be a way for us to take it from the ground and put it back in the atmosphere, and that's why it's part of the fast cycle. So I talked about bacteria that's called nitrifying bacteria that do nitrification, which essentially means makes us some nitrates. We have a backwards process called denitrifying bacteria and denitrification. Essentially, another type of bacteria takes our nitrates or our nitrites and makes it back to nitrogen gas, which is right here. So here you're getting your nitrogen put into the grass through your nitrifying bacteria and your nitrification and all that stuff. But all of a sudden the air is like, I need some of this back. So down here we have some denitrifying bacteria and a process called denitrification in which we release it back up. Okay. This usually happens in environments where there's very little oxygen or oxic or anoxic environments. So that's kind of really what's important about the nitrogen cycle is how bacteria work. So again, from your drawing, please make sure you understand that process of how the bacteria is working. Now, human impacts. I always like to talk about human impacts. I talked about how driving cars has an impact, using fertilizers has an impact. There's lots of different impacts that we'll talk a little bit more about. But one thing that's interesting is a positive impact. Okay. So we know that farmers use fertilizers, and fertilizers can run off from the fields into the water and cause a massive problem called eutrophication, which I'll talk about in phosphorus. But some farming practices use something called crop rotation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, crop rotation is a positive thing, and you need to understand what it is. So essentially what the farmer does is it kind of has let's say you had a big field and you sectioned it off into 4 sections. What they do is they plant different things in each of the 4 sections, but making sure that one of their sections has some sort of plant that is really, really good at putting nitrogen into the soil. So one of those things is called legumes, Legumes, as you can see there. Alfalfa, clover, those are types of legumes that farmers may grow. What it does is as the other areas of their large land, so they remember we planted 4 different things, as those use up nitrogen from the ground, you rotate it every season. So let's say it's a square. Let's see if I can find a pen here. Okay, hold on. I'm going to find us a pen. Here we go. Okay, so let's pretend this is my crop square. Okay, this is where the farmer's field is. It's not equal, but we'll pretend. Okay, let's say they're growing corn here. That says corn. Okay, they're alfalfa. You get the idea. They might want to leave one empty just to spice it up. And maybe they have, I don't know, wheat. Just making this up, guys. Just throwing some stuff out here, okay? So essentially what they do is they make sure that they plant one that's really high in nitrogen. Corn is pretty depleting upon nitrogen, so that's going to take away nitrogen. And wheat is like a little bit, but not as much. So what ends up happening is the farmer, after a season of growing, will actually move where he plants things every year. So the next year, the corn will be planted over here because there's going to be a lot more nitrogen in the soil because the alfalfa was there. The alfalfa then gets planted where the wheat was. The wheat goes to the empty field, which is good sometimes because you can get nitrogen fixation in an empty field. There's nothing is utilizing the nitrogen, so the nitrogen can build up. And the empty field might go to where the corn is. So that is called crop rotation. Okay, essentially it's moving your crops around your area so that each quadrant, okay, gets the amount of nitrogen and maintains high nitrogen content in its soil so you can grow better and better products. So that is the nitrogen cycle essentially. We're going to be moving on to the phosphorus cycle next, and we're going to talk about something called eutrophication. In eutrophication, when we talk about it, please remind yourself that you heard me say it in nitrogen cycle because nitrogen and phosphorus are highly linked when it comes to the process of pretty much killing lakes. So what to take away from this video? Bacteria, how does it make nitrates? So that idea of nitrogen fixation, nitrifying bacteria, nitrification. How do we get it out of the ground? Denitrification or denitrifying bacteria takes it from from nitrates to ammonia back out to atmospheric gases. Okay, so that's really the takeaway from the nitrogen cycle, as well as how do we make sure that we don't deplete nitrogen out of the soils, and that's the idea of crop rotation. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon.